Hi, I'm Stuart Box. I'm an engineer at Sigma Corporation. I am going to describe for you today the proper installation of a mechanical joint connection. Mechanical joint connections are used predominantly in the industry, and we thought it would be a good idea for you to see visually in a lab or bench environment the proper way to do that. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to describe the basics for you. There are basically two types of glands that can be used to make a mechanical joint connection. Standard gland, been around for 100 years, and a restrained gland, fairly new to the market. They both work the same way, whether you're using a standard gland or a retainer gland, restraint gland. Everything about making the mechanical joint installation is the same. So, you have a piece of ductile iron pipe, you have a gasket, you have a fitting, you have your choice of gland depending on your application. You're out in the ditch, you want to make sure that the end of the pipe, the spigot end of the pipe is clean. Soap and water would be great. Also, the inside of the fitting where the gasket fits should be clean as well. The first step is to install the gland onto the pipe. And that gland is installed onto the pipe so that the lip on the gland is facing the gasket. Whether it's the standard gland or the restraint gland, it's the same. The lip always faces the gasket. I'm going to use the restraint gland for this demonstration simply because I'm going to do an instructional video on the restraint, and it'll already be installed for you. So after the gland is installed with the lip in the proper direction, the gasket is put on the pipe, but only after lubricant is used on the pipe end that was cleaned and on the inside, pipe lubricant on the inside of the fitting gasket seat as well. Once this is clean and lubricated, the gland on, then the gasket can be put on. The gasket has a taper to it. That taper should point toward the fitting. Just slide it on, slide it back. Then the pipe is installed in the fitting. In this case, I'm installing the fitting on the pipe for demonstration purposes. Once the fitting's on the pipe and centered, the gasket is pressed into the cavity, the gasket seat on the fitting. You need to make sure it's uniformly seated all the way around. I'm going to lay this down. I'm going to lay this down now to make it a little easier for me to install. Gasket's in place, even in the socket. The gland is moved up against the gasket and centered. T-bolts are installed. T-bolts should go so that the anti-rotation feature built into the fitting locks it in place. All the bolts and nuts should be installed and hand tightened before anything else is done. So once you have the pipe, gasket, retainer gland installed, all the T-bolts hand tight, then you have to use some method of tightening the T-head bolt to the proper torque. I'm not going to go into what all those torques are. They're in our catalog. They're on the web page. We recommend the AWWA standard torques based on the size of the bolt. The device that you use to tighten the nuts is your choice. We recommend that if you're going to use an impact, that you only use the impact for the first couple of rotations around tightening the bolts. I'm going to use a crescent wrench in this demonstration. So the first, also want to, a little trick that I like to use. We recommend and insist on, really, with our instructions, if you read them carefully, that the tightening of the T-bolts is done in a star pattern. So I like to put a number on the bolt and make sure that I follow the same pattern every time I go around tightening the bolt. So I'm writing a number. There's 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll use that same pattern as I'm going around the fitting, tightening the T-bolts. That's important because it puts uniform forces on the gasket as you're compressing the gland. If you get one side of the gland tighter than the other side too quickly, you can put more compression on that side of the gasket and not enough on the other, and potentially could have a leaking situation. So I'm going to start with number 1, and I'm going to get a couple of turns because we're just getting started here. I'm going to get a couple of turns on this one. Then I'm going to go to number 2, which again, a star pattern. In this case, there's only 4 bolts, so it's opposite of number 1. If you were working on a big fitting, you could have a lot of different, the number could be 30, 32. So it's important to keep up with the order in which you've tightened things. All right, so a couple of rounds on bolt 2. And I'm going to continue this process all the way around until I get to the point where I feel like things are tight enough that I can check them with my torque wrench to confirm that I've got the proper torque all the way around. So I used my crescent wrench for hand tightening, and I used a torque. I'm going to use a torque wrench to confirm the final tightening. The torque wrench should be set to the recommended specification in our brochure. And remember how important it is, can't say it enough times, that you've gone around in a star pattern. You need to continue the star pattern when you're confirming that your torque wrench is not moving the T-bolts at the recommended torque. In other words, you're not getting any additional tightening. When you put the torque wrench on bolt number 1, so I'm not quite where I need to be. There. All right. So then I go to bolt number 2. And bolt number 2, I should still be tight. So I'm tight. So bolt number 3, I should still be tight. Okay, I got another round to go because it's not tight. You need to make 1 complete revolution with the torque wrench, confirming that you cannot get any additional torque on the bolt at the recommended torque rating. So I'm continuing in the star pattern that I started initially. That one's tight, that's good. This one. All right, I'm getting a little bit more torque on that one. I still haven't completed the process. The process should continue until you're confident that your torque wrench is not breaking, is not rotating before it slips at the recommended torque in our literature. That is the proper installation of a mechanical joint gasket, a mechanical joint seal. One final check when you're done, make sure that the gland and the fitting face are parallel. If for some reason you over-tighten one side first, you will definitely see an angle in this gap. So this is done properly. Thank you, and many happy mechanical joint installations in your future. Hi, Stuart Box, back to have a short Q&A session with Laurie, who watched our video on mechanical joint installation. So Laurie, did I confuse you on anything, or was there anything that didn't make sense, or any questions you'd like to ask based on you having reviewed the video?
I just have a couple questions. One of the questions is, what are anti-rotation bulbs, and what is that feature?
When you install T-bolts in the field, if you put the T-bolt in from the wrong side, it will spin, and you'll have to use an extra tool in the ditch
to keep it from turning. You have to use a wrench and a wrench. So anti-rotation features have been added to fittings for quite some time so that you only have to use a wrench on the nut and not a wrench on the T-bolt head.
When you're tightening the bolts, how can you tell if the bolts are tight enough, and can you over-tighten them?
The way we like for people to tell if the T-bolts are tight enough is to use a torque wrench. Everything should be hand tightened first, and then the final tightening should always be done with a torque wrench. Some people think that they can get away with not using a torque wrench to confirm the bolt torque, and when they don't, sometimes they get a leak. So we always recommend that a torque wrench be used to confirm the torque on the bolt. The torque on the bolt is different based on the diameter of the bolt. And rather than try to tell you all that from memory, I would recommend that everybody go to the webpage and look at what the recommendations are. They're in the product brochure.
What is the webpage?
www.sigmaco.com, click on products, look for fittings, and you can find everything you need.
Thanks.
You're welcome.